Colin Powell once said, "There are no secrets to success. It's the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure." And we couldn't agree more. This is Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. We'll talk to people from all walks of life and pick their brains about their journey, the process, and the ups and downs to becoming successful. You want inspiration and motivation? It all starts here. This is the Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. And now your host, Kyle Sullivan.
What's going on, champions? Welcome to another episode of Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Today, I got a homie of mine. We are in a mastermind together, and just getting to know him over the last few months, knew that I wanted him on the show. And so, Alex, man, thanks so much for being on the show. And tell us about who you are, what you do, why is it important to you, and let's jump off wherever you want to start, brother.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me on. So what I do is I help doctors and nurses, really anybody that's like a busy professional entrepreneur, but my main focus is doctors and nurses, and I'll get into why in a second, but I help them get set up with dividend paying whole life insurance so they have an alternative means to not only save capital, but also have more control over their capital. Because like the traditional kind of, not that there's anything wrong with it, but the traditional financial advice is save as much as you can pre-tax and post-tax in your IRA, Roth, et cetera. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, that money's locked up until you're 60 for all intents and purposes, and you can't do anything with it until you retire. Oh, and by the way, you have to pay taxes on it later. So, oh, and by the way, I hope it's enough by the time you do get old enough to be able to actually use it. So it's just I don't like to suggest people use it as a replacement to what they're already doing. Just use it, like weave it into what you're already doing. That's the best way to use it. But as for why, like I got into that, like my wife is a doctor, she's an ER physician, and her sister is a travel nurse. And for anybody that doesn't know, I hope it's okay if I swear, being a doctor or nurse is like, it's a hard ass job. And like people, not a lot of people realize that. And while nurses and doctors in general love what they do, they don't want to do it forever. So part of this is also helping them plan their financial exit strategies so they don't have to work endlessly so they can retire. You know, they have another way to use money and make it productive, to multiply it essentially.
I love that, man, because it shows why it's important to you, because y'all are living it. And and so that's super cool to be able to know, okay, here's what you do, but here's why it's important. How'd that journey come about, where you're always like, man, this is what I really want to do? You just stumbled into it, and how's it been? How's it going? What are you excited about? How's it changing? Yeah. Talk about all those things.
Yeah. So I've been in insurance for about a year, or it'll be a year in December, basically. But I got into insurance because my dad passed away in 2018 from alcoholism. He and I didn't have much of a relationship, but long story short, you know, he lived in Boston at the time. My sister and I, and he, like, it was sudden to me because I hadn't, you know, talked to him in quite some time. But, you know, my sister and I went up to Boston just to kind of, you know, figure out what the heck happened, like all this kind of stuff. And, you know, not only will I not get a chance to redeem that relationship because he's, you know, gone, obviously, but you know, he also didn't leave us with anything behind that we know of financially to kind of soften the landing, because my sister and I had to come up with, I think it was $6,000 at the time to have him cremated, because he was also a West Point grad, and like it was important to him to, you know, have that kind of service. So, you know, we did, but we didn't have it. So, you know, my uncle, his brother, was gracious enough to help us out with that. You know, but also, you know, there's too many families that wind up in that kind of same scenario, regardless of what the relationship is with the parent. So it was important to me when I had the opportunity to get into life insurance that was why I was doing it. And it just made sense. Now, as far as how the infinite banking stuff came along and dividend paying a whole life, as I think I mentioned earlier, maybe I didn't, but you know, my wife every once in a while would mention, like, you know, I really love what I do, but I don't want to do it forever because it's so hard. So, you know, that was, and then I started, because I had heard of infinite banking in the past, and I was like, okay, well, let me look into this, see what it's all about. And, the concept of it just made a ton of sense because it's extremely low risk. It's gradual growth. It's not like a get rich thing overnight, but it's a way to save money and then also be able to utilize that money and not have to wait to use it. And it's tax free. So, like I said, there's a lot of doctors that get told financial advice that's applicable to 99% of the population, but in more ways than one, like doctors aren't 99% of the population, so there needs to be other ways that they can have control over their money while also growing their money and not being put at, more risk at the expense of having more money.
Yeah, that's super important. And so you've been in it right over a year. Man, what are some lessons you've learned in building it? How have you grown through it?
Yeah.
Talk me through that.
Yeah. So when I first got into infinite banking, I came at it with the sense of, like traditional financial advice is all bad. It's stupid. Like Dave Ramsey's an idiot, which he does. He gives a lot of good advice to people that, he gives a lot of good advice. It's just not applicable to everybody. So, I kind of came at it from that standpoint, but then I realized investing in the stock market, there's nothing wrong with it. People have done it for centuries. Like, why can't we just pair this with, something like dividend paying whole life and kind of marry the two? Like you have your higher risk assets in terms of stocks, higher risk, but then you also have your lower risk kind of asset in terms of a dividend paying whole life policy. Like there's nothing wrong with having a portfolio of both of those. So I think the financial industry and the insurance industry could do a better job of working together because there's a lot of synergy there that you based on how the two industries interact, at least publicly, you wouldn't. It's kind of like WWE, like you wouldn't be led to believe that they get along, but they totally could, and there's definitely space for that. So that's the part of the other reason why I'm doing this too.
That's cool. Have you been able to bridge that gap, in your local area? Are you able to have good collaboration?
Not locally. I try to make a concerted effort at least to do that, at least online. Nice. And like I'm on TikTok and like all that kind of stuff. And there's your financial like finfluencers and like all those sorts of things. So, I do my best to kind of collaborate that way. But as far as locally, not so much, but definitely online. Yeah.
Gotcha. And man, I know as you're building business, you're also, you got a family, you've got your own self that you're wanting to grow. Talk about the journey of building this side of your business, as well as the growth that I know that you've seen, and what has played into that.
As far as you mean, just like
you growing, just as a person, growth in business, family, all of that.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring that up because with the nature of my wife being a doctor, like her, especially an ER doctor, is kind of like working retail in the sense that your schedule is different week to week. So, it takes a concerted effort from both of us to get on the same page in terms of like, okay, well, when do I need to pick Evie up from school? When do you need to drop her off? Does she have T-ball? Does she have a T-ball game this week? Because she just started playing T-ball. So, it's really opened up the lines of communication for both of us. Cause if my wife's not available, like I'm cooking dinner, I'm making breakfast, like all the things. And, along with that, I signed up for that. It's fine. I'm not complaining. And, you have to be able to plan your days in advance, or else you'll just be like a fireman, like just going from fire to fire and being busy, but not necessarily the most effective that you can be. So that's been the biggest adjustment and the biggest learning curve.
How have you found that you've done that well? And what are some of the growing pains? And I ask that because there's a lot of folks that are in our situation as people, spouses, parents, business owners. How have you found, you juggle those plates well? And, I got more of an inside track because we're in a group together, but speak to the listeners how you make sure that you spin all those plates appropriately.
Yeah. So it's a matter of distilling what your biggest needle movers are, not only in the business, but also at home. So, like a big needle mover for me at home is, concentrated on interrupted time with my wife and with my daughter together, but also separately. So whether that's, if I can't take my daughter to donuts, one week, it's making sure that, hey, I'm getting at least 15, 20, 30 minutes without my phone, playing with her, doing what she wants to do. And then, same for my wife, like saying like, hey, how was your shift today? Did you come across any situations that were tricky? Do you want to talk about it? Do you not want to talk about it? She sees some pretty messed up stuff. So, while I'm not a doctor, whether you're a husband or a wife that's in a similar field, like they just need somebody to let things out to, and you don't have to give advice. Like you just have to listen. So, yeah, those are the two biggest areas of growth that I've personally had to work on. And the other thing too is, because like if my wife's not available, I've got to do all the things. Like sometimes my stuff has to take a back seat. And, I'm only 34, so I still have time on my side in a sense. So I've had to come to terms with, if I need to have a season of push later on, that's fine. I still have time to do that. But it's also, for people like us, like entrepreneurs, like that can be a frustrating thing to deal with because we always want to go, and, my daughter's still young when she's a teenager and hopefully doesn't want anything to do with me. Hopefully doesn't want that, maybe then that's when it would be most appropriate for me to really have a season of push when, I'm not necessarily needed as much as I am right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you bring up is about identifying the needle movers, but then also understanding the season that you're in is different than others, and
right,
and having the confidence to say I'm intentionally choosing this over this right now, and that's okay because man, we know on the internet it's like grind, push, but then it's going, okay, well, is the investment worth the cost?
Right.
And something Ginger and I do often is we talk about, okay, we're sprinting for this amount of time, and then we're gonna rest, and rest may be a night away, it may be whatever, but we operate in sprints because left to my own devices, I will stay cooped up and just grind. Grateful for my wife to be like, slow it down.
Yeah.
What are some of your go-to books, podcasts, resources that help you as you're growing and have helped your growth over the years?
I'm trying to remember. I think really the first book that got me into quote unquote personal development was As a Man Thinketh.
Right.
And that's if you've never read it before, it's very short. You can read it cover to cover in a matter of hours. You probably will read it cover to cover. I'm sure you've read it, Kyle, because you're nodding your head. But man, nobody like people. I don't mean this to sound woo woo, but we don't realize like the tricks that our mind play on us all the time, and whether you're aware of it or not, like it happens with your like with your self talk and. Obviously your upbringing has a little bit to do with it as well, but As a Man Thinketh would be at the top of the list. And then obviously with the nature of my business and our business, we have a lot of conversations one-on-one and in groups. So, really any of Robert Greene's books have been hugely helpful with understanding like how people work, what motivates people, how to figure all that out. So I would say those two have been at or near the top.
Nice. Yeah, man, I love the Robert Greene stuff. I became fascinated with with his work through the TV show Power that was going through that over the 48 Laws of Power, and so it's fascinating. I love both of those. Where do you see the work that you do shifting, changing, evolving? I don't feel like any industry is immune to innovation. And moving quickly. Where do you see it going? How do you see yourself needing to adjust and adapt in a, as people say, an ever-changing world?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think as we come further or closer and further into, these times of economic uncertainty that we seem to be in, like, some people are saying, something's coming, we're going to have a soft landing or a hard landing. People are saying different things. Well, regardless of whether or not that's the case, like, I think people will start to look at something like, infinite banking as an alternative and to what they're already doing. So I see that as a potential change. And then, the insurance industry as a whole is really antiquated. Like, everything is still like I on every once in a while on applications, I'll get asked for my fax number. Like, I can't tell you the last time I was sent a fax or, received one. So everything's still very like pen and paper. And, so obviously that will need to change as well. But I think on a more macro sense, like I mentioned earlier, I think like the finance and insurance industries could do a better job of, working together instead of saying like, oh, this is better, in all accounts than this and vice versa. So I think there could be a lot more effort to be more collaborative in that sense.
Nice. I love that, man. Outside of what you do professionally, what are you excited about personally and family wise, yourself?
Yeah. Well, we're moving into a new house. We're closing on a house in about 2 weeks. It's actually down the street, but it's about 25% bigger than the house that we're in. So we're kind of, going to where the ball is going instead of, going to where the ball is right now.
Right.
And that's, nice. That's a fairly big jump for us, not only financially, but also, like all the things. So, it's a really good opportunity for both of us to, really step up and see what we're made of. I'm going to say both of us. I mean, my wife and I.
Yeah.
So, we got that coming up. And like I mentioned earlier, Evie, my daughter, just started playing t-ball. She was her first practice. She was playing in the dirt, and she's 3. So like, this is her first attempt at organized sports, but her first practice, she was like playing in the dirt the whole time. Last week, she, participated a majority of the time. So I think she's starting to have fun and, start to see what it means to be part of a team, which is a good lesson for anybody to have. Yeah. And then this weekend, all the 3 of us are going up to kind of northeast of Chattanooga for like a folk festival with some friends. So we got that kind of stuff coming up that we're all pretty excited about.
Nice, man. I love that. I need to look into that because Piper, our daughter, is 3, and she'll be 4 next month. And so get her into sports.
Get her in there.
We tried I think a little bit early on gymnastics, and she just wanted to tumble around and roll. And I was like, all right, maybe not yet. But I think that would be that'd be super cool, man. Where you live online, where can people find you, learn more about, what you're doing and the knowledge that you have?
Yeah. So on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, you can find me alex.w.smith10. Okay. So if you just search that, you can find me. I don't have any long form videos on YouTube up, so you'll just have to settle for minute long clips of me if that's your flavor. But we'll get that up and going here pretty soon. But that's where you can find me.
I love it, man. We'll link that in the show notes. And man, I appreciate the authenticity of practical just knowledge of like, hey, here's where it's at, here's where it's going, here's how it benefits. And I know it'll impact the people that you serve, man. But before we let you go, I got one more question for you. At Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast, what does it mean to be a champion to you?
So being a champion to me is doing the best with what you have at that particular time. So whether you're strapped for time or whether you have all the time in the world, how are you making the best use of that time? Whether you have 2 legs or you have 1 or you have none, what are you doing with the capabilities of the body that you do have? How are you using the time with your children, spouse, family? Like, are you using that to the best of your ability, or are you just kind of skating by? Because I think, if you look at, champions in any sport or people just at the top of their field, like the time that they can spend with things, they utilize it to the max. Like they just get all that they can out of it, squeeze the ever living daylights out of the time that they have. And that's why they are where they are.
Yeah, I love that, man. They maximize the time they have, and they have no sense of balance. It is, I'm all steam ahead. I'm going for it, and I'm making it happen. Alex, thanks so much for being on the show and being a guest today, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You've been listening to the Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Our passion is to talk to successful people and hear all about their journey and what it took to get there. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit up the website at unleashthechamp.com. Find us on Instagram at Kyle J. Sullivan and hit up that Facebook page at Unleash the Champ. Remember, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving.